good.
That's good.
Okay. All right. So, how are the authors, right? So, I'm Rick. I'm a strategist, account lead, CEO at BlueSpark. My background's in user experience design, interaction design. So I do a lot of, over the course of my career, I've done a lot of the upfront conversations with clients and had some of these things about what they want to do and how they want to do it, and the different types of pages they want to create. And of course, I also had to have the unfortunate conversations about the limitations with this stuff. But we're not, anyway. So I've been doing this since 1999, which means I'm old. I've been around for a while. Front-end development, all sorts of stuff. I work at BlueSpark these days. I've been here for quite a few years. We're a full-service digital agency, from digital strategy, user experience design, creative development, content, data analytics. And what are we talking about today? So let's dive right in. I want to get through the slides pretty quickly because I really want this to be a conversation with us in the group here, just about what we're envisioning, what this imagined future could look like, where we actually can empower the authors, the content creators, page builders to do something really creative and interesting without breaking things, right? So, but yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what we're here to talk about. Empowering the author to tell their stories and engage their audience in really meaningful ways, in ways that are important to them, but don't break stuff. So I've already kind of talked about the conversation. But let's take a step back and let's think about the stories that we're telling, the stories that our authors and our content creators, what are they wanting to do? When I think about a story, sitting up around a campfire, telling ghost stories, and everybody's engaged and really kind of glued to the speaker, right? But when we think about the web, right, what are the different stories that we're telling? Like, there's a story around MidCamp that's been told. Lots of little stories from the organizers. There's a story for those guys, a story for the speakers. They engaged me in a different way, and I engaged them in a different way because I wanted to present here. A story for the attendees, making sure the dates and understanding the schedules and all this stuff. But these are all stories that are connected that you want to put out there and make sure you're connecting with the right audience. And this ranges from, from the events, from the schedule, to blog posts, to mailing list. Like, it spans all sorts of stuff, right? Today we're really going to kind of focus on the website, and the front end, the pages that we're editing. And I want to start there, kind of looking at how we're telling these stories. How do we go through this stuff? And I'm actually going to use an example of a project that we're working on today with UCLA. But of course, it all starts with an idea, right? Somebody has the idea, either it's the content creator, the digital marketer, their boss's boss has the great idea, right? And for UCLA, they're coming up on their centennial, and the entire campus has a job to do. Every department has different jobs that they have to do. And for the UCLA library, they have this this photo archive of tens of thousands of photos over the last 100 years, telling all these different stories about their campus. Just these incredible, beautiful photos. And so we're working with them to design this site. It's a beautiful site that really puts a lot of emphasis and focus on the photos themselves, right? And the way we're going to build this site, you might recognize a process like this. We get the idea, we design and we test it, we prototype and we test it some more, then we build it and we launch. Hooray! But then what? They're going to get more feedback from their users, they're going to get more feedback from their stakeholders, and of course their KPIs and other things, other metrics that they're monitoring, and are they hitting those? So what happens then? So we're going to need to make these changes, so we iterate, right? Like, that's the web. The web's never done. We constant state of iteration, evolution, and the iteration process kind of looks like this, right? They engage designers, developers, and we go through the whole process again. But there are limitations with that process, right? So does that mean that if I want to, want to move this photo from this place to this place, or that call to action from the right side to the left side, or change the text on that call to action that's in that graphic button that the content author doesn't really know or can't have access to through the CMS, for whatever reason, it can be a slow, frustrating process for authors. And so that's what we want to talk about. Like, how do we change that? How do we reimagine this process so that we can empower the authors, so that they can make these changes. They can look at different ways. Okay, this isn't working. This piece isn't working. How do we change that? How can we evolve that without involving the designers and the developers again? Not just because of the time cost, the budget cost, the increased scope, like all those reasons, but also just so that they feel empowered. They're not frustrated with the system. They're able to do what they want to do. So what if, of course, you have this process because we got to design the site. We got to make it look good. But instead of just designing the site and launching it, we also created a pattern language. And in addition to designing that pattern language, we created reusable components and then built those into a content builder or page builder that they can then manipulate the pages with through drag and drop interface. And we have several of these. Drupal 8.5 was just released earlier this week, and they're doing some exciting stuff that looks like it has promise in this direction. But there's other pieces on the market that aren't even related to Drupal. And so we are actually talking to one of our clients about some of this stuff, and we're looking at the possibilities of using different open source tools that potentially integrate those with Drupal. I want to show you one today, if I can exit out of here. So this is an open source tool, and it's got this drag. Hold on. You aren't seeing what I'm seeing. No ideas.
You might need to mirror your display.
Okay. There we go. Good call. So, this is one such tool where over here you have components that you can create and customize, right? And then so this is a sample video, some content, and I can quickly drag, I have categories of content. If I need a new title over here, I can drag it in, I can edit it. Different styles of quotes that I can put in, and I can move around.
What's that module?
This is not a module. This is from a company called Innova Studios. This is contentbuilder.js, and this is something we're looking at integrating with Drupal. This is an open. Well, it's not quite open source. It's it's fairly inexpensive tool to use. But you see how, like, with so imagine. Go ahead.
Is this just going to throw all of this into a body field, or?
Basically, each of these items are divs, are surrounded in a div with a special class name so that the tool can actually detect what you can actually drag and drop and move around. So this piece right here, can you see my cursor moving around? Yeah, it's just surrounded in a div. It's actually pretty elegant, pretty simple solution. So other questions?
How would that get stored or to a specific page?
Now so now you're getting into some of the complex issues that we're running into, right? Because the way it works now, the way this is set up, and almost like a version 1 that we're looking at, is these are individual components that aren't really connected to anything inside Drupal, right? And that doesn't quite work for some of our clients, like the UCLA library with their university archives collection. That's stored in a centralized database, and we need to be able to tap into that with an API. But you can do that, right? We could very easily, you do see how, like, extending this kind of piece where, okay, this photo right here, I could click this photo. Instead of it just being a link here, it's like, okay, let me click a link to access the database, and I could browse around and find the photo that I want to link to from there directly. Or let's say I had an events component, a featured events component that I wanted to drag in, and I connected that to a piece of content over in Drupal, right? So that's really where I think the big future, the big opportunity here is to try to connect that to content that exists inside Drupal. So I'm creating, I have a visual presentation layer here that I can modify and change, and then connect that to the content that's managed inside your CMS. Other questions? Keep throwing them at me, but there's different, I mean, this is just one of the tools, right? This is just one of them. There's another one, this is called grape.js. It's an open source tool that's a little bit more complex, and to me it looks a little more like Photoshop, and so some content authors might feel intimidated by it, I think, but it does give them a little bit more power. And of course, what we're seeing coming out with Drupal 8.5, but it still feels in its early stages, it feels more like a page builder rather than kind of a content designer, which there's a place for both of those. You're going to need both of those. So now, I mean, the goal is whenever you're getting more user feedback, more stakeholder input, and are we hitting our KPIs or not, I'm going back to this kind of system, and I'm able, we have these pre-designed components that fit the style guide that we're supposed to be using, and just dragging that in, or I'm changing the content. Maybe my analysis has led me to think that the read more text needs to be, view more or something, whatever it is. I have that capability to get in there and make that change. We have empowered the authors to make those changes instead of having to go back to a designer or a developer for every little change, which, I mean, let's be honest here. For all the designers and developers in the room, how often do you want to go back and make little tweaks and design changes every time your author wants to? You got other stuff you got to do that's more exciting, right? So, again, the point of the conversation, the point of the talk here today is to kind of have a conversation about the possibility of these tools and what we're seeing and some of the challenges, and already heard some of the questions around some of those challenges, so that we as we're building this stuff out, as we're exploring it, we're learning more and able to take more of that into consideration. So I was in a talk yesterday where what the guy did was, if he didn't get questions, he started asking the audience questions. It was pretty awesome, so be prepared. That's what I'm doing today. So, the other questions?
Just more of a statement or a thought is, it would be awesome if you were able to build a Drupal connector for that service you just showed.
Right.
The problem is with Drupal being open source, you're never getting an authoring experience like Adobe,
right,
Sitecore, and Episerver, because there's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Right.
So yeah, it would be awesome if there was more UX design focus and sort of end user focus in the Drupal projects.
No, I think you're touching on a very important, very challenging issue, and one that we kind of acknowledged ourselves, which is, all the more modules that you're putting in, you need to have this extensible stuff, and all your developers that are out there coding the modules, they're not necessarily the best designers, so they're not thinking about that experience side of it, but it's that ecosystem and the community is critical to the development of Drupal. But so how do you accommodate that, right?
Competing against the proprietary
right
systems out there.
Right.
Drupal doesn't agree.
Yeah. No, that's very true, and it's becoming, I think, more of a challenge with, one of our clients, they're the marketing team, they're digital marketing, they're kind of the impetus for this kind of stuff, where they need to be able to create these campaigns where these pages are going to last 2 or 3 months. They want to put them up and tear them down, and they want them to look good, and they have all the analytics running against it, so they know what's working and what's not. So they can't go back to the developer or the front end or the designer who says, hey, we need to make this change, and the campaign's over next week, so we need it today, and the designer developer are off doing other stuff on other projects, right? Because there's a shared resource. So it's a real struggle, but I think it's one we got to try to tackle and take on and see if we can solve. But you're absolutely right. That is going to be a real challenge.
What do we currently have available in Drupal that brings us close to that experience?
That's a great question, and like I said, my background's more in the interaction design side of things, but whenever we were doing this initial exploration, we did look at, I think somebody mentioned paragraphs, somebody else talked about some brick stuff, and I know Avi and his team are going to talk about some of the stuff, landing page, topic page stuff in the next section, and stuff that they've done to try to do some of this, right? So it's in there, but what I've seen so far is it's not as visual. It's not, and it certainly doesn't have the centralized components that really give the designers and the front-end developers the real control over how the page looks, right? Go ahead.
I mean, I've seen paragraphs and I've seen bricks and I mean, I understand like the functionality, it's there. I just feel that when we think front end, we're thinking of like the end product, and I think the front end it gets neglected actually in the back end. How you actually build things, like it's not very interactive. Like if you actually use paragraphs, it's like a box that you
Right.
click and it's other information. Like you have to train somebody to
Right.
actually understand what this is.
Right.
Where, like there's no user, like UX people actually looking at the back end saying, how can we make this
Right.
very easy to use, very interactive. This is visually appealing to use.
Right.
And I think that's what gets very neglected. I don't have a lot of experience with Drupal. We just started using it.
I gotcha.
But that's one of the things that you will realize from the
No.
beginning. That it's really like
It's
kinda like very
crunchy,
dry in the
right?
back end.
It's very and it's very hard to get in there and get into it, and you do need that training, and that's what's interesting about a tool like this. I mean, there's a lot under the hood that we haven't even touched on, but just my palette over here and my groups and the drag and drop. This is something people are going to pick up really quick. Now there's power under here. You can get in there and you can do some really interesting stuff, more so, and you probably need some training on top of it. But this feels a lot more approachable, this kind of experience, whether it's this exact tool or something else, right? It feels a lot better, but still got to connect it back. Like we're not just trying to replicate something like Wix or something like that, right? Because this still has to be an enterprise level product that has the data control, the data reusability, all that stuff.
I might have missed something about like how this would work with something like this content builder tool, but is the idea that there's like an API that you hit to get the data out of it that then is coming to Drupal, or?
I think it's going to really, like, this is part of the question that we're exploring right now, the real challenges, because some of the content is pretty clear. Like if you have a blog post or you want to do a featured blog post, like tap that into Drupal for sure, right? Or an event, or but like this little bit of text right here, like this thing, if I come in here and I edit this quote, does this quote only live on this page? Or are we trying to push that back into Drupal as a particular content type, and we maybe, or whatever, right? But something that we know what this data is, and it's going back into Drupal, right?
I think it all maybe kind of matters on the project and everything, and I certainly do support the idea of trying to find ways to make the editing experience in Drupal something closer to this. But I also wonder, for a tool like this, if Drupal is even the home for it at all. If there are other ways that you can consume that data, then maybe there's some other front end.
Yeah. If you can, No, I mean that's a big question too, right? Certainly.
Not to ever say maybe not Drupal.
No, we didn't. Always Drupal. Go ahead.
There is a thing called Rhythm.
Rhythm?
That does very similar things.
Okay.
It's kind of like the refresh shortcodes,
Okay.
but it has a visual editor where you can build pages.
Can you, with that one, are you able to like have a set of components that?
Yeah, it's got like you can drop a slider in, you can drop images in, you can set the background colors.
Gotcha.
But it only lives in that node.
Right. So it's called Rhythm.
Yeah. It's a theme called Rhythm. It's like $50.
Or is white fusion? Oh, it's not on Drupal.
No, it's not a free one. Actually, we used Rhythm at the beginning, but it comes with like a database installation, so I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, and you run into a lot of problems when you want to switch from it, or you have to switch. Yeah, really close that. Like they shipped it with a database, they had to migrate it. It's just very weird.
there are modules.
Yeah.
It's like
Creates more complexity, more challenges.
Exactly. A lot of dependencies
So-
built in already. It's just
So just for the video, I'm going to repeat that a little bit. But so you're saying there's a tool out there called Rhythm, a theme called Rhythm, but you actually experimented with it, and it creates a whole new database install that actually would make it difficult if you ever decide to transition off of it. But it does create some interesting stuff.
There are modules attached.
Yeah, so, gotcha.
To make the shortcuts work.
Yeah, gotcha. Was there somebody else? Yeah.
There's some promising stuff going on in the decoupled authoring experience. I'm not super familiar, but the one I'm most familiar with is Hacks, which is happening in the Penn State group, for learning management.
Right.
I assume they're probably presenting something at this Drupal, but that's the kind of thing that's going to get you this.
Right.
At least in Drupal, outside and inside.
Did you say coupled or decoupled?
Decoupled.
Decoupled, okay. So decoupled authoring experience, kind of, maybe it sits on top of Drupal, or maybe it just taps into some of your Drupal content, but then it's putting out. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, and I'd just also
Sorry.
say, you touched on it at the beginning, sorry if I stole some of this question, but with the layout initiative in 8.5 and beyond, there's definitely work in Drupal to try to achieve that sort of thing. Like the layout builder
Right.
is mostly based on blocks, but with custom blocks, you can create components like these as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
So I think there's also more that we can do to try to follow along with that and explain what we think is missing from that
Yeah.
experience.
No, we've been following the 8.5 stuff, seeing what they're doing. It's really interesting, and I think there's promise there. I'm curious what direction they're going to go in with it, because the thing that we still haven't seen, and maybe this is on the roadmap. You're from Aqua, you know, right? But maybe it's on the roadmap. But are they thinking in terms of these reusable components, these reusable pieces that a front end or designer can control? That's kind of I think the real missing piece in a lot of the page builders and other stuff that we've seen, where it's like, okay, you get complete freedom, complete control, but honestly, they don't. Content authors don't want complete freedom, complete control for their layouts. That's overwhelming. That's too much choice, too many options, and they need to just focus on writing the content. And if a designer can say, hey, look, this is how that's supposed to look, and you drop it in and go, it's great.
I think they are thinking about it, but it's still Drupal.
Yeah, right. I mean, and it takes time. All this stuff takes time.
So like you, I'm old enough to remember, web pre-Drupal. And, you'd start out with this giant block of text and start wrapping, CSS around it. And soon you have this big glob of pretty text. And what was so revolutionary about Drupal is this whole idea of structured content.
Right.
And to me, it seems like we're going back 15 years. It's just much slicker than it used to be.
Well, so
And-
that's sorry. Were you finished?
Oh, sorry, I just have one more thing.
Yeah.
So, I've actually kind of been trying to spool up, this homegrown thing for my company. And the solution that I'm taking is that all of the content lives in a standard node, right?
Right.
So it's all in proper fields. And then we're using paragraphs and entity references to pull that data in. And so, I have a drop down for an image, and so it's going to pull that image. Or I can pull the image and the title, or I can pull the image and the title of the teaser. And then that block is going to be able to be moved around, and you can change the color and change the opacity or do what you want.
Right.
So it's not this slick, but it's maintaining the structure of the data.
Well, and that's the question. That's what we're trying to determine. Like, do you need this quote right here in a reusable data? I could make a pretty good case that you do. And could you do this in such a way that I know that this is what this is, and when I make the edit through, an asynchronous call or whatever, it actually writes it back to the database and I know where to send it. And so it's all like completely invisible to the end user, right? That's pretty powerful stuff. So they're editing a node, they don't even know what they're doing, right? They don't have to be aware of that. They're just focused on content and engagement, right? But no, I think that's one of the questions. And I also feel like that some of this stuff really does it need to be reusable? Maybe not, but when it does, it does. Go ahead, Rich.
So that's one of the challenges that we've run into. So we're using a lot of components through paragraphs. And so to get around that, what we'll typically do is create a custom entity. And then that way, like if you wanted to have a microsite header or something along those lines, it could be a custom entity that they can enter entity reference into the actual page. But then, it does become a little bit difficult because you don't have, like any of the surrounding metadata. We might have something for opacity or something along those lines. So it would be nice to be able to reuse the component. And I know that there's some work being done on paragraphs to try to make some of the components a little bit more easily reusable via, or I should say paragraph bundles, but we always call them components, reusable through the UI. So we work around it, but we do run into some issues in terms of like with multilingual and then can also be some issues just in terms of any kind of, as you're working through like any kind of a moderation process, to where, once that entity is updated, it's updated across the entire site. So there's some complexities there that we've been trying to work around.
Yeah. We have just about 5 more minutes, so I'll take a couple more questions, hopefully.
Sure. This is a great desktop builder, but a lot of things where I've seen working on teams is mobile first, and
So,
anticipating that, and I found myself building components getting into, I'll just call it option overload. So let's take that image of the sunflowers and text, and then imagine that they're going to want to put the next row is going to be text on the left and an image on the right. So what happens on responsive, there are going to be times when 2 images are side by side on.
So all of these components, like they can't, like the way this is built, what I like about this particular content builder.js, and I haven't even met the folks at in Nova Studio, so they're not paying me anything to say this though. But is that it's all pre-baked. Like they can't just say, okay, I put an image here, put an image here. I got to find my component. Here's one. Maybe this is close enough to what they're looking for. And responsiveness is already baked into the component because a developer built that component and expected it to work in a certain way and expects the page structure to behave in a certain way. So that's like.
It's great. It just seems like there's times when 2 components are side by side and not anticipated.
So-
As I said, 2 photos on responsive, so if you put something up above.
Well, and they actually, so this is just
you gotta
the.
have awareness.
Yeah.
So components are great. Components together.
Yeah.
You might respond differently in a mobile environment, and that's when some
Yeah.
options of drop the text on this one, but don't drop
Yeah,
the
yeah.
text on this. Swap on mobile which side it is. So
Yeah.
it gets a little much.
It does get a bit much pretty quick, and there's got to be that balance. Like, okay, you do have control, you can do this stuff, and doing it in a fairly standard way, a fairly controlled way. But if you really want all this stuff, maybe we need to go back to our front end devs. Yeah.
And to solve that particular problem, I only expose full width components. So that solves that problem entirely.
I'm just saying that we start, components respond, we try and anticipate as much, then we get into setting overload.
What I mean is that you can't, the user, when I do this, the user can't put one component next to another component. They have to choose a component that has the 2 things side by side already.
Right. That's fundamental.
That's what we do, yeah.
And that's how this particular system works,
Okay.
is that it's like stacked one on top of the other. So if you want the 2 images side by side, you got to have that component. But yeah, again, but that also, like, this does enforce a certain style of design, right? And so maybe it works for some brands and not for others because their brand doesn't kind of fit into these guidelines. So that's another challenge, another thing that we got to
Desktop
consider.
builder for a mobile world is some of the things that
Yeah.
hard to have the author anticipate those things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a big. When we were talking earlier about governance over content creation, period, and this is kind of ties into that. Like, are you following copywriting best practices? Are you writing short bullets? Are you writing in long paragraphs? Are you thinking about mobile, or are you thinking just about the desktop because that's where you're designing on it, right? And how do you kind of make sure?
Designing and building.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you're already gonna run into that regardless. Like, you can just go into a simple release page and they can go crazy, put 2 images on top of each other. So it's just like you're already running into that possibility regardless. So I guess this is just an improvement on the already existing issue.
Well, and this is, I wouldn't say this is even a full WYSIWYG. It's kind of an editor, but it's not like I don't have complete control. I'm really restricted to the components that have been pre-built for me.
Yeah, but I say like we already have that issue in Drupal.
Oh,
We have
yeah.
2 images
Oh,
on
yeah.
top of each other, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like this is an improvement.
Yeah.
This is already an existing issue. I don't think I wouldn't be like going crazy on that.
Well, and then the other thing too is this doesn't, like, not every page is going to fit into this, right? Like, I have a blog post, I post a blog post, that's that's going to go into my blog post page template, right? Like if I do my calendar, an event, right? That's going to be my events content type, right? So not every content type, every piece of page that's created or content that's created needs to look like this.
Ultimately, this one's deals, though, right?
Yeah. The flexibility, the ability to go marketing like this.
Marketing is having a bigger and bigger presence in
Right.
what is being selected.
Right.
Drupal or otherwise.
Well, I also think you're seeing a backlash from the IT departments. They're like, can you help me with these guys? Because they keep asking for my resources and taking my time and they're never happy. So please, can you like give them a tool so they can do their stuff? Right? So because they're feeling overloaded and overworked too, and would rather work on more interesting things than page layouts, especially when they already launched. Other questions, other thoughts, insights, others, options for solutions? Oh, Ashley, go ahead.
What happens to your user experience design role when essentially you're empowering the client, the content editor, to design all their own stuff?
Well, then I get to go do other things. That's exciting, right? Work on other pieces, like work on other problems. Because I think this is really like content engagement, right? Like it's, no understanding like what CTA works, which CTA where. Am I highlighting this particular white paper download or this other piece of that thing, right? But that's not like...
Is that necessarily a good thing to have people who don't really know anything necessarily about design or designing all their own pages and doing whatever thing?
But they're not exactly designing all their own pages. They're using these reusable components that gives them some flexibility to do that. And ideally, hopefully, they're watching the data and the usage and seeing what's converting. And even if we go a step further, because this is just one piece in my imagined future of stuff where we can actually have A/B testing tools built into this, right? If I could select this video and say, okay, play this video or this video, show this CTA or this CTA, and then adding personalization on top of this. I mean, what you guys are doing, the customer journey stuff, right? This could fit into it pretty nicely.
But you've got to recognize that when you say ideally they're checking all of these things, means they're not.
Especially when you're dealing with 80, 300 content editors, right? So there has to be, so that's another kind of level here, and this one I hadn't actually thought of, right? So I'm glad, again, this is part of the conversation here. Like, how do you build that into the workflow so that those checks are happening, but people are able to get it out the door? Because I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it can be programmed. Can you program that kind of governance, or does it have to be human reviewed?
A lot of what we end up having to do is human review on it. And at a certain point, we don't want to give them any more rope to hang on.
Yeah. No, it's a challenge. I don't know. Time. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Great conversation. And